All right, everyone, we can move on to our panel discussion now. Let me hand over to Dr. Dileepa, who is going to be the moderator for this session.
We can't hear you.
I also can't hear you.
Yeah.
Dileepa.
Hi. Thank you very much, Dr. Sankar. Do we have Dr. Gilbert Lim, Professor David Bow, and Dr. Chen Andy also? Okay, great. Professor David, also can you please switch on your video?
It feels like a weird setup. Being virtually in a panel.
Professor David, can you hear me? Professor David?
Maybe actually we are a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, he's joining.
Go. There we go.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, everyone, the panelists and the participants who were waiting for a long time. Thank you very much. So let me introduce the panelists again for those who have missed. So Dr. Gilbert Lim from Sing Health and Dr. Ransalu Senanayake from Stanford and Assistant Professor David Bow from Northeastern Eastern University and Dr. Jane Andy from Google India and Dr. Adrian Baldwin from HP Labs. Yeah, so let's move on to the discussion. So let me ask few ice-breaking questions and then we can relate to your talks, and I have some ideas to like relate your talks, your work between each other. So let's try to do it moving on. So the first question, I will first start with Dr. Gilbert Lim. So this is about evolving the trust, evolution of the trust in machine learning, because we are now frequently talking about trustworthy machine learning, but like some few decades ago we were not talking about this. We were very amazed to use machine learning and we were trusting it. So with respect to your healthcare domain, can you give a brief thought about the evolution of trust in machine learning in healthcare domain?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I think actually this has been covered in the previous discussion already, but maybe for evolution of trust in healthcare, I guess one of the more pertinent features is that previously trust was actually more easier to come by in a way, because early machine learning or maybe AI in healthcare was more of expert systems. So basically we could still query the system to find out why they come out with the decisions. Whereas now, a lot of the systems are less interpretable. Moreover, actually, there is also another issue in trust in that previously, a lot of the healthcare trust in the earlier years was more for clinicians. Basically, they are supposed to be the professionals. Whereas nowadays, these systems are becoming more and more accessible. So it's not unknown for there to be healthcare applications offered online. So not sure whether you all have tried some of those. For example, enter your demographic information, then they will tell you the risk of some certain disease or even of COVID. So there's these sort of calculators online. So basically, as in a lot of domains, the middleman has sort of been cut out. So basically, the trust has also been transferred from clinician directly to the patient. And finally, there's this issue about small and big data. So previously, the data available about a patient was relatively small. So I mean, a lot of handwritten notes for doctors, even if you wanted to know stuff about a patient, is still quite hard. Whereas nowadays, a lot of these things are increasingly digitized and centralized. So it is also more and more possible for a hacker or some other malicious actor to get all the information about a patient at one go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer. Now let me get back to Dr. Ansal from Stanford. So your domain is autonomous driving, I guess. That's your main interest. So with respect to autonomous driving, like how do you see the evolution? Like it has been growing for a while. So what's the evolution of trust?
Right. So yeah, I have applications in like autonomous driving, say more like space exploration stuff, and also in healthcare. Like I'm mainly interested in high stakes applications, and autonomous driving is like one of the most interesting areas for me, definitely. So yeah, so if you think about like where people have used machine learning a decade ago, right? You don't find like many applications in many real world applications in healthcare or such high stakes field, right? Say machine learning was there for say Google search, right? Where trustworthy, like where safety is not really a big problem, right? If you search something on Google, you get something, whether that answers are the best or not, perhaps you don't mind too much. Okay, what you need is like some kind of filtration. But now, like, because of all this great work, machine learning has come to a certain point where we can apply all our machine learning models in other domains. For instance, in healthcare, okay, also in autonomous driving. In healthcare, like we don't want to say kill people. In autonomous driving, it's the same. We don't want accidents. Safety is extremely important. And say in space exploration kind of applications, it's not really about about people, but it's the cost, right? It takes like $3 billion to send a rover to say Mars, and it's the financial aspect. So I say like initially people try to work in very modular, very interpretable modules in autonomous driving, because that's the way we were able to understand all these AI techniques. But with the development of say XAI and such techniques, so we can actually, we have the chance of like using much deeper neural networks and analyze all these analyze all these models in a post hoc way. And not just it's about like explainability, like it comes like, there are different facets when it comes to trustworthiness, fairness, algorithmic bias, explainability is another one. So yeah, so that's like the trend, I would say. We come from more modular, more simple models to so much deeper, more accurate models. And to complement that, then people use other explainable AI and other techniques.
Oh, thank you very much for your answer. I think like after like two panelists' answers, like we have some conclusions. Like, trustworthy is very important now, because now we are applying machine learning for safety critical applications, and also like machine learning models have become like centralized and like more vulnerable to attacks. So with that in mind, let me move on to Professor David. So it was very interesting talk of you about explainability, like how to edit the models. So I'll ask this question about trustworthiness, like how does explainability improve the trustworthiness, and also are there trustworthiness issues that arise due to explainability?
or the trustworthy issues that arise due to explainability. Yeah, I think so. I think that some of these problems are actually get worse over time as we get models that are more capable. Like any computer program, right? An AI really should be an expression of what the program designer's intent was, and in the traditional machine learning settings, when we have classification outputs or very controlled predictions that we want the models to make, then we know how we're going to measure matching the programmer designer's intent. I think that when you ask, does explainability lead to some trust issues? I think it does. I think that, but I think that actually any open-ended output leads to new trust issues. And so some of the open-ended output might be some visualization or explanation of what the model is doing. Some open-ended output might be the model itself. The next wave of models are all designed to solve open-ended problems, like producing large bodies of text, or image output, or complex behaviors as output, rather than simple predictions. And in these large structured output problems, I think one of the main big challenges is to understand really what the intent even was at the beginning, and how to identify that intent in the output. So when we talk about things like algorithmic bias and so on, I think it's common to use examples like societal bias assumptions that people have that we don't want to have replicated in these models. But I think that bias shows up in many, many complex ways, where you can have unintended effects that people just don't anticipate. And when we get beyond just a small state space that's the output, understanding how to identify unintended effects becomes, a very, very big challenge. Where do we even look? So I think that's one of the reasons I advocate. I think that we should probably begin by looking at the computation itself. I think that if you find surprises in the computation, then it can lead to insights where you look for those surprises in the data. But yeah, identifying what's unexpected is a hard problem.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your answer. Yeah. So I'll first do the ice breaking, then let's talk with each other. So that will be interesting. So maybe I'll add a quick question for Dr. J. So you are working on uncertainty prediction, uncertainty quantification, and solving uncertainty issues. So what kind of role that like uncertainty play? I mean, what kind of challenges that you see when communicating the uncertainty to different stakeholders?
Right. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one example we frequently give in our paper when we talked about out of distribution detection. So that's like, so suppose you are driving an autonomous car, and then you got some unknown instance, unknown image, unknown view of the in your screen, and then you do not know how the model is going to behave, right? So in those cases, probably human intervention would be the best possible way. So you should alert the human about that. So that is one example in autonomous car, but the same example can go to financial sector, to medical imaging. So previously I used to work in the same lab of Ingvar. So we also work on this diabetic retinopathy detection, and then how when we are going to receive some images from different hospitals, then how the model, we saw that the performance of the model typically degrades. And then probably some kind of human intervention, assuming that we cannot retrain the model, we do not have the labels, probably some kind of human intervention for those cases would be necessary, would be very useful. So I think that's.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So let me ask Dr. Adrian. So you were talking about mentioning about the research on machine learning risk management, and like in the context of trustworthy machine learning, how does machine learning risk management help in building the trust? I mean, it's not all about making machine learning models work correctly, but there is more to add. So how does a machine learning risk management framework achieve it?
Okay, so I think if you look at trust, you have to say, well, who's trusting what? And to some extent, the solution providers are needing to trust the models and how they're used, that both they're providing the service that you expect to their customers, so they're providing the correct service to their customers, and they're not adding increased risk. So I think by understanding the risks of the solution they're providing and the ways to mitigate those risks, the potential attacks, what they're trying to do is say, well, actually, this system and service that I'm providing, sorry, I'm just getting a pop-up message. This system and service they're providing is as expected in terms of the thing they're providing to customers, and it's giving the right type of results that they expect to give. You know, there might be errors still, like we talked about with the medical diagnosis. You know, there will be errors because nothing's perfect, but the errors are within the predictable bounds that they're expecting. And so that's kind of bringing the trust. And for people coming in, they're probably trusting the brand of that company offering that service. And trust is very much at that level. Now, so they need to then manage to the kind of levels of service that they're expected to manage. And this, you know, understanding the risks, understanding the potential attack points, understanding everything is correct is part of that trust, but it's only a part. I think there's a big area around, you know, explainability and so on, which is really important and challenging.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So yeah, it's the first round of questions. Now it will be I will ask open questions, so then like you we all can discuss together. So I think that like some of your research work, like there are some collaborations that are possible, like for example, now the like we have explainability, and I guess that explainability can be complemented with uncertainty quantification, because and communicating, like when it comes to communicating explainable some explanation, there can be some uncertainty, and the uncertainty can be like quantified in different ways, and that can be communicated in different ways. So what are your thoughts on that? So it's an open question.
So I can give a few thoughts if you want.
Yeah, sure.
First, yeah, I think what I mean, understanding uncertainty is really hard for people. People really aren't very good at it often, and so when we've looked at risk, I think in the past we've looked at, well, how do people really understand risk as an uncertainty? And actually, I came across an interesting set of psychology literature and an interesting set of economics literature, where they try and do, you know, experiments to see how people understand risk. There's a classic result, I think, from Tversky and Carmen around different ways you express risk, people take different things from it. So if you express risk in a positive way, people think the risk is much bigger, or if you express it, maybe positive and negative aren't the right terms to use there. But if you say, yeah, if you vaccinate people, 3% or a portion will get ill. If you don't, 99.99% will be protected. The way you express a question leads to the way that people feel about risk. So when we talk about explanation, uncertainty, and things like that, we have to understand how people think about it and link in not only the technical work on explainability and risk, but link that with the psychologists and the way they think about it. And I was remembering one set of experiments the economists did where they were doing MRI. There's a particular type of MRI scans where they look at the blood activation into people's brains as they think about things. And they were giving them different risk experiments to do, to see how they thought about different risk problems and to try and understand how that correlates to the things that they're saying. So they gave them little games to play and things like that. So I think understanding, people's perception of risk, how people think about it is a really important area, and fitting that to the explanation and the uncertainty and so on.
I wonder if you have any thoughts on how people relate to epistemic versus aleatoric uncertainty. Thinking back on the old economic psychology literature, it reminds me of how if you ask people place a bet on some cards or something, they're happy to play the game if the card hasn't been drawn yet. But if the card has already been drawn and it's already determined, and somebody's looked at it and they ask you to place the bet, then they become unwilling to do so, because in one case they perceive the uncertainty as a risk, and in the other case they perceive it as a piece of knowledge that exists in the world that they just don't know. It's like a piece of ignorance, right? Even though the probability might be the same, they're not willing to put their $20 down. I feel like maybe one of my intuitions is that humans treat different types of maybe these two types of uncertainty very differently. We're accustomed to doing that. We use language and we communicate with each other differently in these two different ways, things that we know versus things that are random in the world. But when we train our machine learning models, we treat these all the same. And they don't distinguish between them when they make their predictions or produce their outputs or write sentences or draw pictures or steer a car. And I wonder if you think that there's any insight to be gained from this. Maybe it's a blind spot in machine learning, in this distinction between the way that humans divide these two things up and our ML systems don't.
Yeah, maybe it's a blind spot in machine learning, but maybe it's a blind spot in people that machine learning can.
Yeah, it could be.
Help
it could be a blind
yes.
spot in people. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's just interesting that the way we think about risk is far from perfect, and so the way we think about explanation is far from perfect. So we really need to take that into account as we talk to people about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess we need to think about the sources of uncertainty as well, right? Okay, we say this is epistemic uncertainty or the unknown unknowns, but what's the real source? We tend to trust certain sources more than others, I would say. And also when we try to give explanations, okay, so we can, so this is more from a technical perspective. Say if you come up with this, whatever the XAI technique, and you try to combine with, say, uncertainty, say, okay, this is my explanation and this is how much I trust, right? So now the problem with that is is this going to be really useful? As like say probably Gilbert said earlier, like we need to think from outside technical perspective as well, because we provide all these explanations for other humans, right? Maybe some clinicians or whoever the people who are going to use these models. So if whatever the explanation we provide or uncertainty associated with these explanations, if that's not going to be useful for them, then probably what we are doing is not that useful, right?
Maybe
So in terms of
then add later.
okay,
Yeah,
okay, yeah. So yeah, so it's okay. It's important to think about uncertainty. It's important to think about explainability, but we also need to think about like better ways to combine them, probably, like rather than just giving everything, spitting out everything, every possible thing that we can think of.
yeah. So Gilbert can also talk about the challenges we face in the medical domain.
Definitely.
Yeah.
About the healthcare domain for RIS, actually, since we have quite a few interesting stories going on, there's actually one, I'm not sure how famous this is, but previously there was this issue about, for example, let's say you have a team of doctors or dentists who are diagnosing some disease within a population. So let's say that this is a population of 200 kids, and then they find for something like tooth disease in 60 of them. So it's about 30%. So the interesting thing is, after you take out the remaining 140 who are supposed to be okay and give these children to another set of doctors or dentists to inspect, they usually quite often will find another 30%. So it seems that the humans at least are quite affected by the period that they estimate over the population. So if they think a certain percentage is likely in this population, then this will affect their diagnosis independent of actually, or rather sort of is another factor in their diagnosis. So this is something that maybe ML is actually sort of better at in the sense that it doesn't have such preconceived notions. But of course, if you introduce such notions indirectly, then it might be an issue also.
I would like to add this, talking about these uncertainties and interpretability perspective. So basically, one of the approach can be like, I mean, people can understand when you are training. So when you are training some model and you see the model is uncertain to some data point or data sets. Sorry, what is happening? So to some model or to some data sets, then probably we can apply some kind of online learning. So in these active learning frameworks. So I mean, understanding those uncertainties in this viewpoint, when there is some, for example, when there is data uncertainty, probably we cannot do anything. When there is distribution uncertainty, probably we can do something. We can learn about that data point. We can learn about that distribution more correctly, and probably we can achieve a better classification mode. So yeah, so I would like to share about one of the interesting problem we are having in at Google. So I work in this ad science group. So basically, there is this large advertisers like Amazon, Flipkart, and all these big companies. And there are these small advertisers like local advertisers, right? And then when they are going to produce provide some ad and provide or I mean, we have something called conversion model. So based on the clicks, they have to find out the correct keywords, and they have to bid for the correct keywords. So there we have seen that there is some kind of unfairness in this model. So basically, in some way, that the model is kind of robust in some distributions, and in some way, the model is not robust for these smaller groups. I mean, the reason is because of the unfairness, the biasness in the data points, but it's happening, and we need to address that problem, and we need to address that challenge. And probably this finding out this kind of uncertainties will be very helpful to like to help these small and medium business groups. So that's kind of one thing we are working on.
Yeah, so I guess even though we do these theoretical calculations, like finally there are stakeholders, so we have to cater these calculations in a stakeholder friendly way. So with that, yeah, we can talk about other aspects of trustworthy ML as well. For example, the fairness. So fairness is also like we have some notion of fairness, but it has different definitions based on different domains. So we can discuss about that as well. Uh, okay, so it's open. It's also an open question. So who's going first?
Yeah, so okay, so let me follow up with what Jay said. So like, because he was looking at like kind of uncertainty and then fairness, right? So kind of combining them. So in your example, okay, so in general, in fairness, okay, in your example, you clearly categorize these are like say Amazon or and whatever the big players, and then some small players. You kind of have this, you assume this dichotomy, right? But can we really have these kind of discrete categories? So in, I guess in medical applications, they call them like whatever, the protected groups and so on. But can we actually have this kind of, like, can we put everything into different bins when evaluating fairness?
No, I mean, I was just giving an example. So that is one point
Yeah,
of
yeah,
view we are working on. The other point of view, I mean, it's a general answer. So the other point of view we are trying to understand is that we are trying to understand the distribution, underlying distribution of the data sets of the input we are getting. And then we are trying to, I mean, once we have the distributions, once we have the cluster of the data points, probably it would be easier. I mean, even for some product, for larger advertisers, we are also not doing very fairly, right? So, I usually view these things from the robustness point of view. So basically, the model is not robust to certain distributions, and model is robust to certain distributions. So probably one can try to understand the distribution of the data point first, of the data set first, and then try to address this problem. Then it would be much more easy problem. I mean, I would not say easy, but it would be, we can think what we can do after that, right? So one layer of dividing the data, and then I mean, instead of seeing each data point separately, we can see the data point coming from some distribution which is like probably disjoint, probably overlapping, and then try to learn and try to make better on those distributions separately.
Yeah. So any more thoughts on that direction? Or else I can like move this further to we were talking about data distributions. So what will be the solution like in the whole process, like in the deployment process when you see data drift and concept drift? Now what will be the challenge when you see those dynamics? What will be the challenge of quantifying uncertainty, fairness in your own view? Because we were talking about some fixed representations. Now what will happen when the dynamics change?
Yeah, I think with fairness, there's a real issue in terms of, you look at your data set. If your data set is biased and you don't have the right metadata to judge fairness, you're not gonna discover it until it's out there, I guess, where people start to complain. Because again, even if you're looking for things like concept drift and you're not monitoring the right data, you may again not see that. You might see your models doing strange stuff, not quite functioning as you expected. But if you don't collect all the metadata associated with it, you may never really kind of know why, and particularly from a fairness aspect. So I think some of the questions are, well, what additional things do you need to collect and understand, correlate against to really judge the fairness aspects of a model?
So adding to that, like it makes keeps us in a situation that it's uncertain that whether it's because of a concept drift or whether the reason is like model is wrong. So I mean whether the original model is wrong. So what are the precautions like that can be taken maybe in an explainability context to mitigate the issue
So,
of
so when we say like the model is wrong, I mean, no model is perfect,
yeah
right?
of course just that
So,
they are useful. Some are useful.
yeah, so we see our, like, say probably like the vulnerabilities of our model or vulnerabilities of ourselves, like when we try to, you know, like perform in different data sets or different places, right? So okay, I guess it's like a really challenging problem, like what kind of precautions we can take, because it's really application oriented, but application dependent. But like in general, like we need to really validate our models really well. Like you need to find ways how our models can fail. We need to really identify them, like rather than just trying on a validation data sets, we need to come up with methods to validate our models well. But even with that, as you said, like there may be holes, we may fail sometime, and also especially like when we operate in a different domain, whether it's due to like the problems with the model or like the drifting concepts, they can still happen. So validation, in my perspective, like validation should be like a lifelong process through in, say, whatever online learning and that kind of things. Also, like, so this is the thing, right? So when we try to make a, say, model fair because we have certain criteria and we try to make the model fair. It might be unfair from a different perspective. You know, like if I try to do some fairness for you, it might be unfair for someone else. So we should be also cognizant about like all these different aspects of fairness in that sense.
Yeah, so that's a great challenge. Like it's like trying to please many people and many aspects, trying to optimize multiple objectives. Yeah, so that's
Just to give an concrete example on that perspective. So, for example, suppose on this advertise on our advertising team, we were having this discussion that suppose we want to make our model fair, right? And then this model fair means we are going to lose some kind of accuracy, and that accuracy is going to be taken from these big advertisers. That means Google is going to lose money, Amazon is going to lose money. We cannot afford that as well. Yeah, just to add that example.
yeah. So like business case is also very important objective that we have to consider. Yeah, so the discussion is going on in a very good
Oh,
direction. Yeah.
But I must inject some perspective in that the business case thing. So because in your day-to-day work, you're optimizing for the objective of optimizing your revenue for the next sale for the next day. But if your model has a systematic fairness problem, don't you think that there are things that are not in your explicit objective, which could be damaging to the business over the long term? That you lose whole categories of customers who feel like they learn over time that they're being treated unfairly. Like I feel like we have this problem where in machine learning we set up these objectives for our systems, and these objectives are difficult to attain, right? We spend weeks, months, years trying to model and attain these objectives. And then I think that it lulls us into forgetting that at the beginning of the whole process, we just made these arbitrary choices that, this might be tractable, but might not be actually what we're trying to accomplish. The actual objective we have might be more subtle, might be more complicated. And so when we say, we're struggling with these issues of fairness. They might be contradictory to maximizing our test set loss or attaining our objective. Maybe part of the discussion should be that maybe our models are becoming capable to the point where we should back up and ask what the objectives should be.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We should always revisit the objective as well, where things aren't working. It was made of something I read around autonomous cars, which was, yes, the algorithms keep them following the rules of the road really well, but they have an abnormal number of crashes, which comes to mind. Well, actually, the objective maybe is wrong, because the objective, when I drive, I don't necessarily follow all the rules, and certainly people around me don't. But what I'm very good at is realizing that actually that person won't, and adapting my behavior to it. Whereas the autonomous car isn't doing that because it doesn't have that kind of wider ability. But maybe as we develop the algorithms, we go away from just the immediate reaction to having that kind of wider objective to take into account all that other information, assess things around you and react appropriately.
So maybe this is where explainability comes in, because I feel like as we make objectives that are more subtle, that are more complicated, that they become harder to measure, and evaluating and explaining the behavior in more complicated ways will become more and more central, I think, to the whole practice of machine learning. So I think there's a connection between what we're talking about here and these settings as they get more complicated for us.
Yeah, I was just thinking like how humans think about like objectives. Like say, so when we operate in a particular society, like we have some objectives, right? Not like forget about machine learning, just humans. Like say, what's the objective of our panel? So we come to some consensus. Somehow, like we discuss with each other, challenge each other, and come to some consensus somehow, right? That becomes our objective. And as you said, like this objective changes over time. For instance, like say related to say fairness, say long time ago, so slavery was fine, right? Like having slaves in the society, it was like acceptable. But now it's not so. It's different. In another 100 years, I don't know like what the objective and like what people would call fairness.
Indeed.
Yeah. Fairness is all about human thinking and their agreement.
All boils down to ethics, I guess. Like,
yeah, I guess I see part of it as ethics. I see part of it as a random selection thing. So if I select a random person out of my possible people who could use a model, the model should function the same for whoever I select, irrespective of things that I haven't captured in my model. So I've been thinking about it in those kind of terms.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was going to say on the explanation thing. I think I keep coming back to explanations can be really complex, and maybe there's two different things we need to think about. We need to think about explanations almost to experts, and then explanations to the general public who don't have any expertise, who maybe don't require a great deal. I was thinking, if you think of going to a doctor certainly never explains to you a great deal. They might say, yeah, you've got the symptom, therefore you've got that disease. They don't explain the biology of it, but we trust them, partly because of certifications, partly because they've had to explain to other experts that they really do understand. And so there's this kind of different levels of explanation at different points, and certification and reputation becomes a really important part for people who don't understand the technical details. But being able to explain the technical details is really important to the experts to validate. And so I think there's different levels of explanation that are really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's another aspect that I'd like to highlight, and I think that there's in the kind of explanation work that we do, I think that there's a role for public education. I think that the the arrival of capable AI on the scene in society is new. People are not accustomed to it, and it's being deployed pretty quickly. I feel like part of our role is to just sort of help people understand the nature of the systems that we have. I work a lot with generative image models, and one of the big concerns in the generative image modeling setting is that we're able to make images that look so realistic now. People just assume that these are real photographs of real things that really happened, and I don't know if there is a technical solution to this problem, or if the problem is one of education, where we just need more people to understand, computers can do this now. That the cost of synthesizing a very realistic image is very low, and you should just be aware that what you might be looking at might not be a real photo. And so yeah, so I feel like in a lot of our settings, we have these amazing looking capabilities, and maybe there's just an education that underneath it there are processes, learning processes, that may not be as sophisticated as they seem, and people should have the right kind of skepticism, not pick up the wrong cues from what they're doing here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to have a kind of demo of that creating of a fake image, and show quite how easy it is to people to really scare them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and make them aware. It's like when you first put your kids on social media, and one thing we did was we created fake accounts.
Yeah.
To show you, don't trust the people, because those accounts claiming to be aliens are the ones you've just created.
So those deepfake images and deepfake videos remind me of those things, and it is actually have lots of scary applications in, politics and all these things. But I just wanted to add that probably this improving the generative models can be one solution to understand the data, and there has been quite a lot of experiments and quite a lot of work on its application in improving the robustness. And probably one way to, I don't know, I'm just saying that probably one way to see whether the generative model is actually good is to check whether they actually can improve the robustness of in a classification setting, right? For example, so in adversarial robustness, people have always tried to, you add some noise, and then people try to remove that noise and then put it back in the classifier. And there has been some model, like some technique that add this GAN model or autoencoder or VAE kind of model that try to remove the noise and then try to put it, basically put them in the original training manifold and then try to correctly classify it, right? And people have shown that those models are failing, and those they actually are not producing better robustness, right? And then recently diffusion model came, and then they have shown that it actually, if we can actually do that, we can actually learn the underlying distribution correctly. Then we can put that image back in the manifold, and we can actually improve the adversarial robustness. And we do not need to train a robust classifier probably. Theoretically, at least, we do not need to train a robust classifier. Once we can ensure that all the images, whatever we get, we put them correctly in the original training manifold. So that can be one interesting way of improving robustness. I'm talking about robustness now, moving away from fairness. But probably under learning underlying distribution, learning about this generative model, that can be actually using this state-of-the-art generative model and improving them, that actually can link this fairness, probably fairness, robustness, and all this domain adaptation or all these kind of problems. They can link together.
But like in that case, like, but the challenge is like how to put the images into like the correct place in the correct manifold, right? Like if we know that,
right? That is
yeah.
a challenge, right? So, but if you have a smaller perturbation, like adversarial perturbation, and then you try to do that, probably you just, I mean, you have some manifold, and then assuming that the adversarial manifold is slightly out of this original manifold, and then you can put it back. And probably you are going to put it somewhere in the neighborhood, and yeah, I mean, in the second classifier, the final classifier, final linear model needs to be robust in the smaller neighborhood where the projection is going to be, and probably we can achieve better robustness then. And I think understanding the underlying distribution, underlying data distribution, then we can solve lots of problems. Basically, we can understand about the where the, I mean, distribution is going to give you the view where our model is failing, where our model is not fair. I mean, and then we can try to understand, try to learn better on those data points as well. So this fairness issue, I mean, those things are kind of interlinked. So learning a good representation, learning a good, generative model probably can solve a lot of issues in the trustworthiness.
I do with the image is I always as a security person, I always come back to, well, can't we just assign the image in the silicon that's taking it as it's come from that chip?
Indeed.
And, yes.
You know, I think there's been, I think in the generative image space, there's been this great work. There was some work from, I think the Afros Lab or from Adobe, where you can take an image and you can actually create a heat map and show where all of the fake parts came from, right? You can see the fakes, or you know, the cryptographic approaches. You know, you could check for a signature, right? It's amazing, but I feel like there's this first step, which is that the poor user has to have the idea that maybe they should check.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we tend to believe our eyes, and we don't think, oh, maybe we should check on this one.
Yes.
And so I think that yeah, maybe it just may be that we have to teach people, you know, what the heck is going on here. You know, I think that there's quite a big gap, and you know, we are, you know, we and our colleagues keep on inventing these things pretty quickly. And you know, I think that our field is moving a little faster than culture is keeping up.
I think that's one of the real problems. I read an article from somebody who did image forensics, and he said as soon as they come up with a technique for detecting, or as soon as they started to come up with a technique to detect a fake and then talked about it, that knowledge will be fed back into the fake creation process. So
absolutely,
it was no longer valid. So he stopped talking about the techniques he used. That's always the problem. And I worry that actually AI is maybe moving too fast, because we're looking for new features, new models, new ways to use models, and we're not going on the, well, are they being used safely, as somebody thought about all the attack problems that happen. And it feels like kind of AI, it feels like computers, you know, I guess early 2000s, where we weren't concerned about security, and suddenly Code Red hit Microsoft and they downed tools for a month or more while they develop secure software engineering practices. So I feel like there'll be a breaking point that will come, and then the world will have to respond and bring in much more of the trustworthy AI elements in response to bad events that happen.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, now the discussion went to very interesting directions. Now we have arrived at the final phase of the discussion. To end, I would like to ask concluding remarks. Any final thoughts on collective responsibility towards achieving trustworthiness of machine learning? Any final thoughts?
So I think it's all of our responsibilities to look beyond just the training objectives that we set in front of ourselves when we train these systems, and to really ask the question, how do we understand how they work, what they do, what they know, what they don't know, and how can we allow our users and our customers to understand the limitations of these systems? I think this is really underlies a lot of the explainability and transparency work that we work on. And I feel like this other goal that you might treat as a secondary thing, I think increasingly maybe should be the primary thing that we're all working on. As the old star of the show, just getting the machine learning to work in the first place, gets more and more well understood. Explaining it to people and understanding its limits, I think, is going to become center stage. And so that at least that would be my my final message to people, is to don't feel embarrassed about spending all your time on this. This is the problem.
Yeah, and to add to what David's saying, I think there's also things around making sure not just the general public and people know, but regulators know, so that they can make informed rules, regulations as things progress. I think that's really important, because otherwise things can't go very well.
Ransalu, Jay, final thoughts?
Yeah. So in general, I also agree with all this, and also rather than just developing models that maximizes the accuracy, we need to think about more broader objectives, like multi-objective, like improving fairness, transparency, and all stuff. But also so we also need to think about how our models will be used in bad ways. Like maybe we develop a, say, whatever, face detection algorithm, and how that can be used in some ways that are harmful to some other people, right? So that's also some kind of like trustworthiness, because if you are building something that can harm others, then that is also not good, right? So in broad, generally, like when we develop a model, so my final thought is like we need to think a bit more broadly about like what are the different applications, what is good about this, what is bad about this, and what we are trying to really achieve.
Great. Jay?
Yeah, so I also completely agree with that. So probably I do not know. I mean, from the application, from the real world applications perspective, we need to understand if we are going to make a very robust model, then probably it's not good for society also. In some sense, there is going to be like a bad effect of that as well. Like as he mentioned, like face recognition algorithms, we want our privacy also. So in some sense, we need to understand that the model should be this model should be like human should be able to. I don't know. There is going to be a trade-off. In some sense, human should be able to understand what is wrong, what is. I mean, in some sense, it's going to be full. Human should be able to fool this kind of face recognition models, but on the other hand, human should not be able to crack this financial model. So basically, we might need to think take a step back and probably think that in some way I mean, which models are hackable and which models should not be hackable. So for financial activities, maybe we can have some pre-processing steps there. We can detect the fraud, and that can be a non-ML technique, right? And we can detect the fraud and we can remove those frauds. But in some cases where we are the input, and then probably we should have a bypass way of removing I mean fooling that model, or not to be, I mean, not to be dependent, not to be too robust on those kind of models as well. So yeah, I think we were talking about this in the beginning of the talk, that we need to think about the objective. So probably, as we are progressing, probably we need to think about the objective and understand what is happening, and how should we, how should we define our objective in the first place.
Right. So, final thoughts of Gilbert.
So maybe I'll just to emphasize that sometimes maybe it's just not possible to maximize trust for everybody, because different stakeholders might have conflicting and sometimes even adversarial goals. So for example, for healthcare, the trusted one will be maybe the patient, as the end user doesn't want all his personal data to be available to the doctor or the insurance company. Whereas for the insurance company or the doctor, maybe their view is that maybe with all the data we can know more of you so that we can price your insurance correctly. Or maybe the doctor wants to know because he wants to know what past treatments you have undergone, so what contradictions he has to look out for. So basically these are conflicting goals, and sometimes it might not be possible to maximize trust for everybody in the first place. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for their amazing and informative, eye-opening talks, and for the interesting panel discussion. So this made it's opened different directions that we can work on and collaborate on. So I hope that we can have this connection so far. In the future as well, we can have similar sessions. Thank you very much for spending your time. So I keep this, I use this as an opportunity to thank MERCon organizers to approving this workshop, and as well as the panelists who joined these sessions amidst their busy schedules, and some panelists joined at midnight. So that's we should be grateful, and also the participants for engaging with us for a long time, and we wish to have similar sessions in the future as well. There will be great research opportunities with these speakers as well. So we'll have more discussions, research work, and collaborations. So see you in the next session, and please keep in touch, everyone. Thank you very much. Good night. Good morning.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.